I know many of you, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm the Executive Director of Learning RX here in Reston and Austin, Texas. And we are starting to provide, this is something I've had on my list to do for 5 years. I'm finally getting it done. To provide a series of speakers that would be beneficial to us as parents. Some of them may be more appropriate than others given your children, but I thought it would be very helpful, given the conversations I've had with many of you, to provide you some additional perspective on how we can be better parents, because nobody gives us a book when we have our child and say, this is how you do it. And I know that I have learned so much from the resources in the community. I want to bring these to you. So tonight we have Dr. Karen Varblow, and she and I have known each other probably for a couple of years, but probably in the last 6 months have gotten to know each other even more, and found that we actually have a lot of views on ADHD kids. And I've been using terminology, not quite her terminology. And I thought, wow, this model makes so much sense. This is how I talk to parents. But she actually put a model to it because she's a pediatrician that focuses on folks with ADHD. Okay? And that's her expertise. And she's come from a long history of background. But she also has 2 children who are both ADHD, so she lives with it every day, just like we do. And so she has first-hand experience, which I think is fabulous. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Varblow.
Thank you. I just wanted, before I get started, I wanted to thank you all for coming tonight. Again, the weather has not been ideal, but thank you for making it out into the cold and braving the snow. I wanted to let you know about another talk that I'll be giving a week from tonight, actually, sponsored by the Fairfax County Association for the Gifted and the Twice Exceptional Support Group for Fairfax County. So there are flyers up at the front if you're interested in that. I also have a card up at the front if you're interested. Okay. As we go through this, if you all have questions, comments, please jump in, okay? If I feel like I need to cut it off, I will. So don't hesitate to jump in and ask for clarification or add things along the way, okay? And I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. As Maureen said, I'm a pediatrician. I worked in general pediatrics for about 10 years. Prior to medical school, I started off in education. Then I was in social work. Then, like I said, I went to general pediatrics, did that for a while, and I found that what I really, really, really loved was working with the kids and the families of the kids with ADHD. So ultimately, I left general pediatrics to focus on this group of kids. I was diagnosed myself when I was a medical student, so I know a lot about it from being a patient myself. As Maureen also said, I have 2 kids with ADHD, and the more I do this, like everyone I know has ADHD, and so I know it as a spouse, I know it as a patient, I know it as a mom, I know it having been a teacher, a social worker, case coordinator, doctor. This is my life. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. I would be remiss if I didn't sort of start off with the official definition of ADHD, okay? It's new this year with the DSM-5, and I'll just go through it briefly. In order to be diagnosed with ADHD, a person has to have 6 or more symptoms of inattention if they are 16 or younger. If they're 17 and older, they need 5 symptoms of inattention. Those symptoms need to have been present for at least 6 months, and they're inappropriate for the developmental and chronological age of the child. There need to be, or 6 or more symptoms of hyperactivity and impulsivity, 5 for adolescents, again, same thing, at least 6 months, and inappropriate for developmental and chronological age. The condition needs to have been present before the person was 12 years old. It needs to be present in 2 or more settings. And I think of this as, if you only have ADHD with your mother, it's not ADHD. If you have ADHD with multiple people or multiple situations, circumstances, now we're talking, okay? The symptoms need to interfere with and reduce the quality of social, school, or work functioning. So it needs to be impairing to meet the diagnostic criteria, and the symptoms are not better explained by another mental disorder. There are 3 presentations of ADHD. There used to be subtypes, now they are presentations. There's a combined presentation. This is the most common, predominantly attentive presentation, which means that you have sort of this but not this, okay, which is second most common, and then predominantly hyperactive and impulsive is the least common. It means you have these symptoms but not these, okay? That's fine, it's great, but I found that it didn't really help me understand myself, my kids, my husband, my other family members, the people in my life, really at all. It didn't help. I mean, it gave me a name for some of the behaviors that they were exhibiting, but it didn't help me understand it. So I sort of dug in and started to search for a way to explain and understand what it means to have ADHD. And over time, I've developed my no-go model, which we'll talk about tonight, okay? The premise for this model is that essentially there are two functional parts of the brain. There's the part that knows things, okay? It knows what you're supposed to do in a certain situation. It knows what you would like to do in a certain situation. It keeps track of your goals, your value system, your moral code, your blueprints. I often call this sort of your heart of hearts, okay? All those shoulds that you know so well and can rattle off piece of cake and that your kids know so well, and when you say, what are you supposed to do when you get mad at your little sister, and what are you not supposed to do when you get mad at your little sister, they know the answers, right? This is what the brain knows, and it lives in one place. Okay, this is function, again, not geography of the brain, okay? Another functional role for the brain is what I call the go function. And this part of the brain is in charge of what the person actually does or doesn't do in a given moment. Okay, at the point of performance, when it matters, and in the heat of the moment, what happens? That's driven by this part of the brain over here. Okay? In neurotypical individuals, or individuals without ADHD, who sort of don't fit the profile that we're going to talk about, these two parts of the brain work together quite seamlessly. So when you give a child without ADHD multi-step directions, okay, I need you to turn off the TV now, go upstairs, brush your teeth, get in your jammies, pick out what story we're going to read tonight, and come back down and tell me when you're ready. We'll go up and have story time. They can store that list in the part of their brain that knows what they're supposed to do, and they can start looking for the remote. And they can start looking for the remote, and they can run into the Pokemon card that they've been looking for forever in the cushions of the couch. There it is. And then they can check back on that list and say, oh, I know I was looking for that Pokemon card, but really what I'm supposed to be looking for is the remote. So I can turn off the TV, go upstairs, get my jammies on, so on and so forth, right? So they can shift back to what they know they're supposed to be doing, get it done, and when they get distracted halfway up the stairs, they can remind themselves why they're going upstairs and what they're supposed to do when they get there, and make it all happen. Okay? Do any of you all have kids who can sort of operate that way? A couple? A couple? Probably not all of your kids. We probably maybe wouldn't be here, I don't know. Or maybe it's not your kids, it's yourself. This doesn't work for everybody, okay? And that's where we run into a problem. If it works, the individual's behavior and actions will reflect their intentions, their moral code, their value system, and their goals. Makes sense, right? Because they're using that information to drive what they do. Okay, so that's the premise, and we're going to call this sort of neurotypical normal function. Okay, if somebody has ADHD, the core problem in my mind is that those neurons, those yellow arrows that were in the previous diagram, that are critical to making a person's behavior commensurate with their intentions, their values, their moral code, don't function very well all the time. Okay, that's sort of, in essence, the problem with ADHD. There is a lack of self-control due to sort of lack of appropriate function of those brain cells that connect those two functional parts of the brain, two functional roles of the brain. these things are not functioning appropriately.
Is it okay to take a picture of that?
Sure. This one doesn't have the copyright. Some of them might have the little C. It's mine.
Thank you.
Sure. There are actually EEG studies, okay? So the studies where neurologists put electrodes all over the brain and look at brainwave function of different aspects of the brain, of different neural connections in the brain. Some of these studies indicate that people with ADHD, these neurons, these brain cells, are actually in sort of a pre-sleep mode. You guys know that stage of sleep? You're just falling asleep and you've sort of fallen partly asleep. Maybe you can sort of be aware that somebody's walking in the room. Maybe they say your name and you can sort of hear them, but you can't quite get yourself up to like respond and answer and wake up. Anybody know that stage of sleep? That's where these neurons live. That's where these neurons live a lot of the time. Okay? So if this pathway is asleep, the two sides are disconnected, we're going to have less impulse control, because when I just want to go, I'm not going to be able to use my principles to inhibit my urge to go. And when I really don't want to do something, I'm not going to be able to use my sort of inner motivation, my drive, that's at a higher level of cognition than my sort of desire to not do it. And I'm not going to be able to behave in accordance with my intentions and goals. Okay? I'm not going to be able to use what I know to influence my go. Okay. What that sort of means is that the know part of the brain that generally supervises the behavior of the individual isn't going to be able to do that. So there's a lack of internal supervision, self-monitoring, right? Those of you who have kids who maybe I'm describing, how's their self-monitoring? Their self-regulation? A little shaky sometimes, right? They can do things that they know they shouldn't do and not do things they know they should do sometimes because of that disconnect. And what happens is the world sees the behavior and might draw negative conclusions. And the world might wonder, oh my gosh, why do they do that? Why do they do that? Right? Okay? And so that's what we're going to sort of explain a little bit more. Okay. The world sees the behavior. The world doesn't see the heart of hearts, doesn't see the intentions, doesn't see the moral principles. The world sees what you did or what you didn't do. And it's going to make assumptions based on that information. Okay? The world has learned that if we say roughly 10% of individuals sort of have this problem, it means about 90% of the time, if the world judges a person based on their behavior and makes assumptions about their value systems and their moral codes based on the behavior that they've seen, 90% of the time, they're going to be right. Right? It's not the world's fault. It's what it's learned. And so that's what it does. When it sees the behavior, it might say, well, huh? Why are you doing that? And what it might conclude is, you must not know very much. Or you must not have a strong moral code. You must not have that sort of compass, right? Or maybe you're just lazy. Or maybe you're not very smart. Or maybe you're not very sensitive. On and on and on. Have we heard these terms to describe our kids? Over and over. And sometimes it feels inaccurate. Right? When people use these kinds of terms to describe our kids, don't you kind of get the feeling like it's not the whole story? If that were the whole story and the kids just really didn't care and didn't have the moral principles and the guiding forces and the value systems that we've taught them, we probably wouldn't be here. But there is this sense that that's not the whole picture, but the world doesn't see it. And it draws these erroneous conclusions. So that's bad enough, right? That the world's not seeing our real kids. But it gets worse. Because the way that children learn about who they are, the way they develop self-concept, is by looking in the mirror that the world holds up to them. And when the mirror says, you're lazy, you're stupid, you don't care, right? You're insensitive, you're inconsiderate. That's what they're telling these kids. And the kids don't always have any other way to know that that's not the whole story. Okay? So we might see kids behave like this. And we might respond like this. And that might be a bigger problem than sort of just in the moment. Okay? What the kids might see when they look in the mirror might be something that's not only not accurate, but damaging. And that's a problem. Because they develop a self-concept. And they grow up and they take that with them. And that becomes part of what they know about themselves. So when they can use what they know about themselves to influence their behavior, this is now part of it. They think they're bad kids. They don't think, I'm a good kid, but I can't always access my goodness. I can't always access my heart of hearts, my true inner self. Okay? And if you think you're a bad kid, and you know you're going to get in trouble, it's a pretty simple process to go with the poor behavior, right? Any questions so far? Is it ringing true at all for you guys? Okay. All right. So that's the problem. But you and I also know that ADHD can also look like this. And this is supposed to sort of picture kids being really creative. Kids who have an idea, they have a goal, and they start at the beginning, and they plan out how they're going to execute this project that they've invented. They prepare for it, they gather their supplies, and they make it happen uninterrupted, not distracted from point A to point Z, piece of cake. Sometimes that happens, right? When does that happen? Somebody?
When they're interested.
When they're interested, on a snow day, right? When they want to build that fort or that whatever, right? Legos? Lego projects? Okay. Video games? Right? They can develop remarkable skills, right? It's not that they're incapable of performing without distraction and without perseverance. Okay, so what's that all about? I just told you that that the connection doesn't work, so where am I going with this?
Yeah, I was going to ask
Okay.
you, how is it that they magically can go from A to Z then?
What is that, right? And this is, I love this expression. There's an expression, a child with ADHD can do something right once, and the world will hold it against them for the rest of their lives. Right? I saw you do it yesterday. Get it done. I know you can do it. What's different today from yesterday?
It's a different day.
Well, how? What does that mean? How can we really understand that so that we can help these kids and help ourselves, right? And that's where we're going next. Okay. Okay. The way I see it, there have got to be ways around this problem. Okay. We've seen it in action. I've seen you do it. I know there's a way that you can use what you know to influence your go. Okay. And in that way, you're going to have more impulse control, more self-control, more of all the good stuff that I know is in there. Okay. And the way I see it, there are two primary ways around this problem. Okay? And one, you guys alluded to, stimulate that brain. Wake these neurons up. Right? Wake those things up. When those kids are having a snow day, and they have this elaborate fort they want to build, and the whole snowball fight and divide the teams up, and like, there's no stopping them, right? But when they have a Lego village in mind that they're going to build from scratch, there is no stopping them because these things are awake. So we got to figure out how we're going to wake them up and use that. Okay? All of this, the way the nerves work is dependent on neurotransmitters. Okay, electricity has to get from point A to point B for these things to work. And that happens through neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are affected by many, 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 many things. Okay? Diet, sleep, exercise, stress, genetics, your mood, your environment, and the degree of stimulation in the moment. And if we can sort of maximize and leverage this, now we're on our way somewhere. Okay? So we got to think, well, you know, again, in our no category, we know what's good healthy food and what isn't, right? We know what foods maximize our kids' potential. We know how much sleep they need, right? We know they should get exercise every day. Green time is good. Screen time, too much screen time, not so good. Right? We know all of these things. But we need to really think about degree of stimulation, I think, and leverage it much more thoughtfully than we have been. So I listed a few things here that I think help wake these guys up. Okay? Starting with excitement. When these kids are excited, there's no stopping them. Movement for some of them, not for all of them, right? And this list is going to vary from child to child to child. Engagement. How many of your kids do well or poorly in a class, depending on their relationship with the teacher? It's the connection. The connection wakes these things up, and the lack of connection, the engagement, okay? Fascination. If they're really into dinosaurs, oh my gosh, they can memorize things endlessly, right? But when they're told to memorize something about, you know, nouns and verbs that's not particularly fascinating to them, it's like their memory is not working. That's this, okay? What's relevant to them? It may be relevant to mom if the bedroom is clean or not clean, right? If it's not relevant to Sally or Joey, it's not going to happen. We've got to leverage that. Urgency and fear. Parents figure this one out in a hurry, don't we? We've learned that if we say, can you please go take care of this for me? Hello, can you please go take care of this for me? Can you please take care of this for me? Nothing. But when we say, if you don't get this done, I'm gonna run over. Oh, geez, okay, Mom, right? And they're on it, sometimes. What's the problem with that? What's the problem with that? That has to become the new baseline. And if that's the new baseline, where do you have to go next? Up a notch. And then that's the new baseline. And the way I see it, sooner or later you're threatening to behead your children and yourself in order to get anything done, and that's no way to live. Okay? But the fear works. And we know that instinctively. We need to use it better. Novelty. Whose kids have really bad days the first week of school? A couple. Not the majority. Usually, when we're going to a new situation, best behavior, right? It's when we're a little more comfortable that we start to like lose it, right? Usually a new situation when we're a little bit nervous and it's kind of unfamiliar, keep it together. Okay? Passion. Mondays are different, yeah, that's a different story. Because that's like Monday after Monday after Monday, right? That's a different story, absolutely. Things we're passionate about. Okay, you guys get the idea. Medication, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on medication tonight, but I will say that when medication is used well and appropriately, its job is to selectively stimulate these neurons, and that's why it works.
Yeah. We, at least in our experience, when we give the medication, we notice a difference.
Yes.
exercise as much.
Right.
So it's, on the one hand, there is a stimulation through those things, but on the other hand, the medication hinders those
Right.
stimulations. Can you explain a little bit that?
Without going into detail about your situation, what I will say is that generally speaking, with a lot of time and a lot of focus and concentration and determination, most of the time we can find a medicine or a combination of medicines that can overcome, that can work better than what you're experiencing. Sometimes we have to have some workarounds around appetite suppression, for example. Sometimes at lunch, the kids are not hungry. Their diet's not gonna suffer. I'm gonna make sure that they eat more healthy food at breakfast, a really healthy snack after school, an extra dinner before, we're gonna work around it. So it takes time and it takes a lot of work, but if it's done well, generally speaking, not 100% of the time, but most of the time, we can really make it work so that it works the way you would want it to work. Okay?
And the other thing is, at least in our case, the medication lasts what it lasts and it's not carrying over. So we don't give medication on weekends so he can do more exercise. But on the other hand, that disconnect is disrupting
Right. He's
everything
not getting his
else.
homework done and everything
So
else done, and it's
question-
disrupting the family
question
function.
being, do you continue with the medication? I mean, is it better to do medication every day
Right.
instead of 5 days a week?
Right. People are, the field as a whole is really coming around on that issue. It used to be very popular to give drug holidays. And we've started asking ourselves, holiday for whom and from what? Like, what's better on these holidays? Not much, usually. And what I tell my patients, and the way I look at it, if you feel the need, if you feel that drug holidays are a good thing, there's something that is happening on the drug days that you don't like, then we need to work on that. We need to find a better system so that you want to take the medicine sort of all day, every day. I design it, if I can, so that the medicine's working when the kids are awake, period. Because it's confusing if we go back to sort of the mirror, right? These kids don't have the insight to know why some hours, some days, some situations, the world is holding up one mirror, and other hours, minutes, days, situations, circumstances, the world is holding up a different mirror. They don't have the insight to understand that. So if they're interacting with the world and interacting with themselves, I want them to be their best selves.
With your, since you've been in this field for a while and you also have children that have ADHD, have you found a way in which you have methods that have worked in which you haven't had to use medication? I haven't used any medication. I don't condemn anyone that does use medication.
But you're really hoping to avoid it.
I'm hoping to avoid it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all are.
Yeah.
It depends. It depends, and we're going to talk. So we're going to get there. We're going to get there, okay? And then how much sort of help any one individual person needs is going to depend. Some people can leverage and get the results they want. Some people can leverage and get better, but not what they want. Okay? Okay. So again, essentially what we're going to do is we're going to stimulate these neurons, wake this brain up. Oops, that slide really got messed up. So that how a person goes is driven by what they know. Okay? Fun is the bottom line. A lot of times. Okay? Fun can really make a big difference. How would we leverage that? Okay? I think of the times when you least expect it. The one morning that everybody's gotten dressed, they actually brushed their teeth, they ate breakfast, they found both shoes, got them on their feet, and they're headed out to the car successfully and calmly and smoothly, bam, you know that's when it's gonna hit you, right? Little Joey is gonna reach out his foot and trip little Sally, or vice versa. Something is gonna explode. What is that? Like, it's clockwork. You can count on it. When things are the most smooth and calm, they're gonna find a way to stir it up. Why? Stimulation. Now they're entertained by watching little Sally's blood go all over the snow. Right? They don't feel great about it, sort of in their conscience, in their know, but their brain is like, oh God, finally. This whole morning I've been dying because it's been so boring. And now, finally, my brain feels better. It's stimulated, it's awake. Chemically, I'm in balance now. Okay? That's what that's all about. So what we need to do is find healthier, more positive ways to keep them stimulated than by watching Sally bleed all over the snow.
Light bulb just came on for us, so that's why we're laughing, because we're like, oh my God, that's exactly.
Right?
Because you don't understand it. You're like, what? Oh, we were having such a great time. Why would you choose?
Right, right? To them, it's not such a great time.
Yeah.
It's intolerable boredom. Intolerable. Okay. So we need to figure out ways to make life more stimulating. It's a lot of work. I'm not saying it's a piece of cake. But I'm saying if you want results, when I think about it, this is what I'm left with. Like, this is the way I have to raise my kids. And this is what's going to preserve my relationship with my kids. Because if I'm left with Sally bleeding all over the snow, I'm using fear, urgency, right? All of these other things to try to sort of guilt Joey into not doing that again tomorrow. The relationship is suffering. The whole family function is suffering, not just the individual. Yeah.
That's what I was going to ask you about. So if you have another child, which you don't have that issue with, how does that continuous, if you have to incorporate continuous stimulation?
So they might have fun too. Like, and I don't mean to minimize, but I don't see much that's wrong.
Right, right.
With this as sort of a guiding principle. And if they're not into the race, they don't have to participate. But they're not gonna find something worse, right? And if they are, then the race was not the thing to choose. We gotta find something else. It's work. But I think if we're finding ourselves, dealing with kids who are seeking stimulation in unhealthy ways, it's on us to redirect that search. Okay? Supporting their passions and interests. Okay? We know that this is gonna wake that brain up. Let's use it. Okay? Okay. So that's sort of phase one, or solution number one. That's one way around the problem. Yeah?
Why do they seem to choose the unhealthy ways? And I, no go, what leads them to the bad go?
Yeah, great question.
What does that tell us about ourselves in general?
Great question. I love that. Here's what because again, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this stuff. Here's what I think. I think there is something really compelling about being on an edge, a little bit of danger, or a little bit of what's going to happen. A little bit of suspense is a really compelling thing. There is something compelling about seeing if you can do it. Testing yourself, testing the limits, pushing the envelope is compelling. And I do think that if you can direct that interest to pushing the envelope in terms of a sport, it'll work. But it's much more convenient to push the envelope in sort of ways you have handy for the kids. Does that answer your question?
So without the no-go, we'd all be adrenaline junkies. Is that
No, because I think that without the no, so people who naturally have enough stimulation here, people for whom these neurons are awake normally, they're not craving the stimulation, right? But I think for a lot of people with ADHD, they don't feel sort of chemically right because of this problem. They can feel that part of their brain is kind of like not with the program. They're not on their game. But when they're doing something just a little bit dangerous and it's just a little bit edgy, they're on their game. Like, there's no room for error. There's no room for sluggish, and it feels right. The brain feels awake. It's the way I understand it. I mean, I'm not telling you sort of research-based, evidence-based proofs here, truths. This is how I've sort of interpreted the behaviors that I've seen.
I think you're right about, I think I've experienced that too, because our son plays basketball, and when he's out there,
He's on it.
and to the point where even at practice,
Yep.
it's like, he's just so intense, and he's always been like
Yep.
that.
Yep. Because he cares. It matters.
Yeah.
It's his thing.
Yeah.
It's his thing. It's his passion. It works. Yeah.
Is I don't know if you're gonna get to this level of detail, but do you think it's not enough dopamine in the brain? Is that the neurotransmitter they're missing? Or
That
do you know what
seems to
neurotransmitter
be
is?
where the evidence
Is it?
is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're trying to stimulate
and-
that excitement to get the dopamine.
Actually, let me rephrase that. It's not clear that not enough dopamine is the problem,
Uh-huh.
but there is decades worth of evidence that increasing dopamine seems to help.
I see, okay.
So
Got it. So even if their dopamine levels were normal, they may still crave that
We don't
sort
know.
of adrenaline.
we don't know.
Thing. Got it.
Yeah. We don't have that level of understanding yet. And I think we'll get there. And I think that that's going to be helpful until we have like exact sort of neurochemical understanding of what in the world is going on.
Right.
This is sort of the best that I can do to live with it.
I just wanted to share that I've been reading a lot, and I really believe in the power of the mind and the power of attitude. And when my child became old enough for me to explain this condition, I also took the opportunity to explain to him how he could control it and not let it control him. And again, as he's been maturing, he's not really a victim of this condition. And while of course he's affected by it, he's learning, etc., him being more aware of it, he can control it more. And we've been successful with behavioral modification with no medication.
Yeah.
We've tried medication in the past, and it really didn't work for him.
Yeah.
But again, it's a lot of work on the parent's side. It's just amazing.
Absolutely.
The level of
No
involvement.
argument here, I'll
The
tell you.
power of the mind is very, very powerful.
Yeah, and so I think, and again, so we'll get there, but that's why I want you all to that's why I wanted to share this model. Because I do think that if we understand it and we can use it, it's very, very powerful. And if we can explain it to our kids, they can use it. I think it's enormously powerful.
What about, and we've done meds and no meds, what about like anxiety that can result, are we gonna get into that later?
A little bit.
A little bit.
It's definitely part of the deal. I don't have it built into this talk, but I have another talk, so. we
Okay,
can, I mean,
that'd
if
be
we-
next week.
No, it won't be next week, so that'll be a different talk,
Okay,
but yeah, we can, it's absolutely part of the deal.
okay.
Yeah.
What about a child who wants to, say, he wants to play football, but when he's taken to the field, or okay, let's play football, and suddenly just is distracted, and he says, oh, okay, we'll play football, but now I want to do that first. And in the end, we feel that he doesn't do anything. Like, he says that he wants to do this.
Right.
When it gets down to that, he wants to do something else.
Right.
That's a lot of distraction.
Right. So he sort of knows what he's supposed to do in order to
Yeah.
be a good football player.
Right.
And he wants to be a good football player. In the moment,
He's not
he
being able
can't
to do
use that. I give an example of my house. If anybody drove by my house, you would assume that I don't care about flowers and gardens and pretty yards. That would be a pretty logical assumption if you drove by my home. The truth is, I would love to have a garden that had flowers blooming from March through November, and I think it would be really cool to like plant them in such a way that at any time sort of has a whole row of blooming flowers. And they would fade in and out with the seasons, and they would be planted in such a way, like, I just think that would be awesome. And I know exactly what I would have to do to make that happen. From going to the library, to reading up on what bulbs to buy, to buying the bulbs, to planting them, to watering, to weeding. I know exactly what I would have to do to make that happen. And I do want to make that happen someday. I've lived in my house 12 years. It falls off my priority list every single day. You know, yeah. And if I, you know, if it were high enough on my priority list, I would be more mindful of it and use this information to really make it happen. You know, you make choices. But I think all of us have that. It's just exaggerated. And so how do we make football more fun, or more worth it, or more engaging? Or maybe it's not really that engaging, and maybe he needs a new goal. Right?
Yeah, but changing goals every, not even like not having a garden is because the priorities were different. You know, you didn't get time and all that. But here, at every minute, like he goes, he wants to play, he wants to do something.
Yeah.
But then he changes his mind. Once
right.
we get him to that, okay, you
right.
want to play football? Okay, let's go play football.
Right.
We'll all play with you.
And now it's not novel anymore, and it's not interesting and
once
engaging
he's on the field and he says,
right.
No, I don't want to do this,
right.
I want to do something else.
Right.
But can I ask you something then? Do you take him off the football field and let him do something else, or do you?
No, that's what we do. Like even if we try to do, okay, you don't want to do this, let's do something else. What do you want to do?
So let's go to plan 2.
Sure.
Let's go to plan 2, okay? Because what I just described in sort of solution number 1 is how to reconnect, okay? But I think there's another way to deal with this problem, and that is eliminate the need to use this information and rely on the connection. And we do that through automaticity. Okay, again, I'll use myself as an example. I like to run. And at times in my life, I've been a really avid runner. And at times in my life, like now, I have not been running. Okay? Here's the thing. When I decide that I want to get back in shape, I want to start running again, I know I will love it once I'm out there running. Okay? So I decide that tomorrow morning I'm going to set my alarm to get up early to go running. And the alarm goes off, and I look out the window, and it looks really dark. And I hit snooze. And I hit snooze a couple times. And then I look at my watch when it goes off after I've hit snooze a couple times, and I think, oh, I don't know. You know, if I sneak it in now, I might not wake. I might not be back in time for my kids to be awake, and then like they're gonna. All right, maybe after work. After work, new plan. Okay, after work. And this goes on for months, right? And I haven't hit the trails. Okay. But when I'm running actively, what happens is I wake up, I get in my gear, I tie my shoes, and I'm half a mile down the road before I ever even think. It's just automatic. I didn't have to rely on any of this. That work was all done and really not part of my getting up in the morning, tying my shoes, and getting out there. Okay? Automaticity. And that's what brain training, I think, is partly about. Okay? We've often heard, right, how many of us have read, kids with ADHD do well with structure and routine. What does that mean? What is that? It sounds boring. It sounds really hard, because apples don't fall from trees, and probably we're not the best structure and routine people to begin with, right, for ourselves, much less for our children. But I think that's what it means. I think it means automaticity. I think it means if you can get your kids to just brush their teeth because it's 7:20, and that's what you do at 7:20, and you don't think about it, then you're done. It's the thinking about it that's hard and that gets in your way. It's not the doing it that's hard.
That's what I was going to tell this gentleman. That's what helped me with my son, who's now 15. Almost everything that we wanted him to do initially, he would say, I want to do this, but we would, like you said, it was routine to the point where he started liking all the stuff that he ended up eventually being in that he didn't want to be a part of because we made it so like a routine. We get up, we know we're going
routine and structure. That's what these authors are talking about, is eliminate the need for the no, okay?
Is there fabricated.
I suppose.
Okay, let's balance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's gonna have a lot of it's not something that somebody who is not at risk for OCD. This is not gonna send them there.
Right, okay.
Okay.
Real quick, what's the reasoning for those words at the bottom?
These are some things that we sort of teach our kids to do, or some things that we use that I have found very, like, we teach our kids to say please and thank you. We don't teach them to think, should I say it please when I ask for this? We just teach them to just, right? It just comes out, it rolls out automatically. And so we don't hear from our feedback from the teachers and the people out there in the world that Joey never says please, because we've taught him to just automatically do that, right? Sally just says thank you, reflexively. And it just always works, okay? We can't get her to do lots and lots and lots of other things because we haven't just like made it automatic. But the pleases and the thank yous, the kids are really good at sort of this nod and pretend to listen, right? Are you with me? Yeah? You understand? Their brain is 5,000 miles away, but they've learned to reflexively, yep, I'm with you. Yep, got it, no problem. I'll be right there. Right? Automatically. Sometimes, again, like I said, if you can get them to brush their teeth at 7:20, and then it's just done. Okay? This is why 1, 2, 3 magic. Anybody heard of or used the 1, 2, 3 magic? This is, I think, why it works. Because we just give them that 1, 2, and it's just become part of the trigger to just make the automatic thing happen, the automatic result. Okay? I use this a lot when kids are resistant to taking medicine at first. Okay, I start them off with taking medicine in a spoonful of ice cream. So there's no resistance at first. 2 weeks, we run out of ice cream and we forget to buy more. By then, it's routine. They just take the medicine. Problem solved. Automaticity. Okay? These kids have motivation, they just can't use it sometimes, right? Motivated to be a good football player, can't use that when push comes to shove at that point of performance. Habit, I think, is our next best friend. Okay? So, to kind of wrap it up, how do we turn this thing around? How do we turn this problem around? Leveraging what we know. Okay, we know the ADHD brain needs to be engaged, needs to be busy, it needs to be stimulated. Get your kids busy, engaged, and stimulated. Okay, not overscheduled and not dragged all over town, but doing the things they love to do, right? And then use the automatic pilot function. Okay, use it a lot. I don't know if you guys can see this. This is Pavlov. This is his dog saying, "Watch what I can make Pavlov do." As soon as I drool, he'll smile and start writing into the book. Okay? We can make certain functions just like breathing, just like making our hearts beat. These functions never go to the brain, okay? They're driven from reflexes. And we can make please and thank you and brushing your teeth and doing your homework just like breathing and just like a beating heart. Okay? And I think that this is one of the ways that brain training, this is one of the sort of things that brain training can really, really target and enhance. Okay? It can make just sort of bringing your brain back into the room. One of the questions that I ask a lot of my kids is, when you're in English class, what percentage of the time that you're in English class is your brain in class with you? And what percentage of the time is your brain somewhere much more fun than English class? Right? And I get some pretty interesting numbers. But if they can train their brains to just automatically come and be present when they get the signal that it's time to do that, self-control, motivation, attitude, all comes into play, right, to just making these things habitual. And then we get to the really good news, which is now we've got a positively functioning brain. And so getting positive feedback is stimulating. So now I'm motivated to work hard and do well and use what I know and perform well automatically because I know it's going to get me kudos. It's going to get me attaboys, and, right? And that's cool. So that's stimulating. And it feeds itself. Okay? We're going to further enhance that positive cycle. Those relationships are going to mend. The family function is going to change. And we've really turned, I think, using these things, we can really, really turn the life trajectory 180 degrees for these kids. From kids who have been told and believe that they're bad kids, to kids who have told and believe that they're capable, great kids with great potential. That's life-changing. Okay? Who could use this model? Everybody, right? Parents, certainly it can be helpful for parents. Teachers, if teachers sort of used this model, coaches, both academic coaches and sports coaches, you know, the ADD coaches and the life coaches, all of counselors, therapists. It's sort of a strengths-based model that if the more people sort of approach these kids in this strengths-based way, the more support we will have in turning their lives around and getting better results. So, in conclusion, I just want to sort of stress, ADHD is a brain-based developmental disorder. It's not a moral failing. It's not laziness. It's not all the things that our kids and we have heard from the world. Brain-based developmental disorder. Okay? The behavior of individuals with ADHD does not necessarily reflect their knowledge base or their value system. Responding negatively can exacerbate the undesired behaviors. Not what we want. Okay? There are many ways available to us to turn that negative cycle around to produce positive outcomes. And the earlier we start with our kids, the better results, the better life we and they are going to have. And I think it takes a village. This is not for wimps. This is hard work, and getting support is absolutely part of the deal.
Yeah, and that's hard because both of my kids have inattentive ADHD, and so when teachers, especially my daughter, who is compensated pretty well and doesn't have the same executive functioning issues my son has, they really don't seem to believe me. I still need to give them the copy of the report with the TOVA, but it's hard to get the support if they're not really on board with it's really there.
Right, right.
Because she's very strong-willed, and we tossed it off to that.
Yes.
Kind of a compliment, but at the same time, you know, there's been things that prevented her from doing what she needs to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, it can be hard because these kids don't wear a big sign that says, I'm impaired, right? I don't want to behave this way. And so, to me, educating the teachers so that they understand, educating the grandparents and the neighbors and anybody, the more we can sort of expand the way people understand this disorder, the more support we and they will have.
I have one kind of experience like that. They in the school they tell me my boy has ADHD, and as a parents we get in action and find information and educate ourselves. But the doctors were kind of like, maybe he has a touch, but he is not 100%, or he's not necessarily needs medication. And we started studying ourselves, and I am a strong person, so I noticed that when I yelled at him, he was exactly responding the way that I don't want it.
Right.
So I started studying my teachers, and I'm not saying that they are not good, they are super, they are great, but I noticed that when he's been with a strong teacher, very, like the teacher, I want this, Marco doesn't function.
Right.
And we have one experience, like one of them, they say, I am very strict, and when we say, it's not a function. And now the teacher he gets more result than I am behind you.
Right. The connection. Again, learning RX, right? You guys know there's a connection, and that's part of the deal. It's not that you're forcing your kid to sit in front of a computer screen and do brain training programs for an hour a day. There's a connection there. There's excitement. There's positive feedback.
So how can you teach a child to focus if they're supposed to be doing homework or if they're at school, supposed to be writing something? How do you teach them to not be looking out the window and looking around and getting their work done?
Right. Some of that I defer to Maureen. But what I would say in general is if it's not fun, it's not going to work for them. So we as parents, as teachers, need to find some way to make it more fun. Okay? If they've got to get their math homework done, but they can do a problem and then do a cartwheel, and then do a problem and then do a cartwheel, right? If we can figure out some way, or if we can do it verbally so that they're engaged. Whatever it is. Sometimes the music and whatever it is that just makes it a little bit less awful.
What if they're at school though and they're with 20 other children?
Right. I mean, I think that the teachers need to be more engaging, you know, and so this is, I'm not going to be able to give you a fix for tomorrow, but conceptually I think that we're not approaching these kids in ways that work for them sometimes.
Is there some kind of game you know of that you can teach them to focus, like you would do that at home?
Talk to Marie. There's your lady right there. It's not my area of expertise.
Brain training definitely helped our son, who is in high school now. And he's not on an IEP or anything like that, but I think had we not gone through brain training with Maureen, we would have probably had to put him on an IEP, and we would have had behavioral issues too. Now, it's just the opposite. He got a Student of the Month award in Mrs. High School for his mannerisms. We just feel it at home with the behavior sometimes, but you see a difference, and we would have never believed it had we not be experiencing it for ourselves. So,
and it's really,
it has helped a lot.
this is new stuff. Like there's evidence that's just really starting to emerge to show how, again, using the plasticity of the brain. We don't know how much impact we can have with these kinds of strategies yet. It's really new. But it's looking more and more like this stuff can really be effective. And in the meantime, from my perspective, I would also love to see, you know, sort of a revolution in terms of the way the world approaches these kids and the way we try to teach them and engage them. I think that we're not doing them justice. So from our standpoint, that's on us. To the extent that we can help them sort of really just reorganize and utilize the brain power that they have. I'm gonna talk to Marie.
It would be nice if you guys had, because what you're doing here, it's hard to find, like, you know, there's, like you said, the diet component. So there's an opportunity possibly, like if as parents, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I've done research, I've read, I felt like I've done so much, but to be able to go one place and kind of have direction in terms of diet, nutrition, you know, seeing a physician, understanding how the brain works, just being able to bring it all together and be in a place where you feel safe, that you can say, this is what I'm experiencing with my child. What are some of the tools that are out there?
This is my dream. I would love to create that. Yeah, I think it would be, yeah.
This is a huge question, so I don't know if you can answer it in summary, but I've talked with different people and tried to educate friends, family, what have you, and I know that a lot of executive functioning goes hand in hand with ADHD, and I'm not exactly sure why that is, to the extent that some people actually mistake ADHD as executive functioning, as working memory, as they think if you have one, you definitely have the other, and that's not necessarily true, is it? No.
I think the way, some of it's semantic, right? And some people have sort of taken a semantic position.
They overlap almost.
And in my view, when I read the executive function literature, when I read the working memory literature, when I read about processing speed, difficulties, and I see they're all the same kids, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
They're the same kids, and the way I understand that the lowest common denominator sort of for all of this is self-control. If you don't have the self-control to bring your brain to bear when and where you want it, to me, I call that ADHD. If you can't bring your brain to bear on executive function, some people call that executive function, dysfunction, right? And some people, if it's a memory-specific thing, they call it a working memory problem. What I suspect is that sort of underneath it all, if there is a self-control issue, and if we can't bring ourselves to function the way we want ourselves to function, if we can't bring our brains to function the way we want our brains to function, if we can't bring our mouths to shut up and not say things we wish we hadn't said, like, it's a self-control issue. And we call it whatever we want, but I think the approach is the same.
Right, but there are different pieces of it that you need to actually affect the plasticity of your brain in order to improve in those separate areas, but they all roll up into an attention issue.
Right, right,
Okay.
right. I think so.
Yeah.
People will disagree with me.
It makes total sense.
But it could go on and on. I think that the whole visual processing disorder, if you can't control your brain, you can't bring your brain to bear to interpret what you're seeing sort of accurately and correctly, self-control, same problem in my mind. Auditory processing disorder. You're hearing it, but your brain's not like on it.
But it is interesting how kids can display different levels.
Right, it manifests itself differently in every, so another one of my favorite expressions, you've seen one kid with ADHD, you've seen one kid with ADHD. Same is true for autism spectrum. It's sort of the same underlying principle, but it manifests itself so differently. So I have 2 kids with ADHD, and they are absolutely opposite in the way their ADHD affects them. Absolutely opposite. You would never look at them and say they have the same disorder.
That makes it hard to treat.
It makes it hard to identify, hard for teachers to identify sometimes when they think of it as one thing and one set of symptoms. And the girls don't display those symptoms. And girls in certain age, and boys, like when it changes, it morphs over time. That's why I don't like that sort of symptoms-based DSM-5 diagnostic criteria definition.
Right.
This works for me much better to say, like, what is going on? I have hundreds of these kids I've seen. No 2 are the same, but there's something the same about them. What is it? And that's how I understand it.
Is there anything that says, it just seems to me, and maybe it's just because I'm more aware of it, but it just seems to me like there's more and more kids being diagnosed as ADHD. Is it more kids are, or is it just kind of more of that's more awareness?
And nobody knows for sure. Nobody knows for sure. I think that there are probably a couple things. I think, and feel free to, if you guys need to go. My feelings won't be hurt, but I'll stay for a little while longer so that I can answer some more questions. I think that, especially in bright kids, right, they figure out ways to compensate. They figure out ways to fool themselves into feeling urgency when things aren't really so urgent. Or they, give themselves consequences to sort of up that fear. Or they figure out how to choose a topic that's really interesting to them to write their paper on, so that writing the paper is not such, right? There are ways that people compensate. And then at some point they hit a ceiling. So the way I see it, if somebody's sort of potential is here, by definition, ADHD is impairing. So by definition, their behavior, their actual performance is relatively lower, okay? But they might not hit that ceiling for many years, or they only may hit that ceiling sort of in certain really tough circumstances. There may be only certain kinds of things that really challenge that weakness, okay? It's still, so I like I said, I wasn't diagnosed until medical school. I was a girl, and I was in a school with small classes, all girls. Like, I had a lot of things going for me that helped me compensate, okay? But at some point, like, I crashed. I couldn't get beyond that ceiling, but I still had a feeling like, God, I should be able to do this, right? And that's what led to my diagnosis. So, I lost track of your question.
Just wondering if it's more
Why is it, okay, oh, right, so I think that the demands culturally now are different than they used to be. There is Martha Denkla, is a Harvard-trained educator, and she has written some books about education, and she talks about how in the old days, when it was a one-room schoolhouse, small number of kids, mismatched ages, so the big kids can sort of take comfort in taking care of the little kids, and the little kids can look up to the big kids, and the kid who can't hold still can go get the firewood, even chop some of the wood, right? Bring it in, haul it in, stoke the fire. They had to walk to school, walk home, whatever it is, they're getting more exercise, they're more outside time, like the demands are different. So I think that that's part of it, that people are just bumping into their ceiling a lot sooner than they ever used to. There may be environmental factors that are making it more prevalent. I don't know, the research on that sort of.
The food too.
Yeah, I mean, like, who
Processing of the
knows?
food.
And there's some evidence that looks at air pollution, and I don't know. It's clearly genetic. It's clearly genetic. The other thing that might be influencing a little bit is the preemies that are surviving, that didn't used to survive. They're much more likely to have ADHD, and they didn't used to survive the way they are now. So that's going to skew the numbers a little bit. So, I don't know. I think that it's both overdiagnosed and underdiagnosed.
That makes sense. You mentioned the tools that you had that helped you until you got to medical school. Can you tell us a little bit, because I noticed you said small classroom, so because for us, our son was came from a private Christian school where he was one of 8, and now he's in public school. He's doing great, but we're like, do we keep him there? I mean,
Right.
you just want to make sure you're doing the right thing too.
Right, and you never have a matched control, so
Right.
it's so hard, you know? And so everything that we decide that we're gonna try, we'll never know if it was the thing that helped or not. I don't know. I think that there were some things that worked for me. So, true confessions here, even on tape. My 4th grade teacher put a gymnastics mat in the back of the classroom. And she let me do cartwheels, as long as I was quiet, and I was in the back so I wasn't disrupting the other kids. I could do cartwheels, and I could learn better doing cartwheels. She knew that. She let me do them. Like, you don't see that today in these classrooms with 30-something kids crammed. Like, that just doesn't happen. So, it worked for me. Had I had a small classroom with a really strict teacher that I really didn't like, who spent all of her time, like, berating me, would not have been a good thing. It would have been much better to be in a big classroom where I could just be invisible, right? So,
my son is in 8th grade, and for the first time in his whole life, he had an A in math, but it's a very, very small class. He's in special education, and that small classroom proved to be the key, and also weekly quizzes instead of a longer period
Right,
and a
right.
test. So obviously that's an environment that helps him succeed, but what would be the best way to explain to him when he sees, obviously, in 8th grade, that self-esteem, the mirror, that he's in a classroom for not the regular.
right.
What's the best way to explain to him? Because there's nothing wrong with him, it's just.
Right, right. You know, I really like to focus on the positives, right? I focus on the fact that everybody's different, everybody learns differently, and everybody needs to find what works for them. So what I would say is, like, figure out what it is about the special ed program or whatever to that classroom that's working for him, and explain the reason you're in this classroom is because this, and this are what work for you. I can't learn without moving. I can't learn without moving. Cartwheels in 4th grade, right? And I just somehow learned that that's what works for me. It doesn't mean that I'm a better or worse learner than people who can learn being still. It's just different. Some people learn better when they have one-on-one engagement. Some people learn better when they can hear and not see, right? Everybody has their own sort of thing. And if you found something that works for him, then there's your answer to why is he in that program.
If your child gets through college, do do you have any advice about what they, for employment, what they kind of need to do? Do they tell their employer or?
The nice thing about growing up with ADHD is that you can engineer your life a lot more as a grown-up than you can as a third grader. If you're a third grader, you have to be at school at 8:20 in the morning or whatever it is, right? You have to take math even though you hate math. You have to learn to spell the words. You only get X amount of recess, right? All of the rules. And you have no control, no choice whatsoever. When you get to be grown up, you can kind of engineer your life to fit you. So just like I was saying, like, I think it's important for people to understand what works for them, leverage it, engineer their lives around it. I was never, ever going to take a job or even consider a career that would have required me to be still. It was not in the cards for me. And that was important for me to know about myself, sort of from launch, right? I think self-awareness and understanding what works for you is really what it's all about. And then you can find a life and a career and a partner and a system that works. If you're not somebody who's going to remember to pay the bills, you got to set it up online so it pays off, whatever, or you got to marry somebody who's really good at remembering to pay the bills, or whatever. You have to, so.
Both of those questions are things that I kind of feel like is missed a lot with ADHD. I feel like some of the brightest people have ADHD. They have a high level of creativity. They have a high level of drive for things that they love. They may be wonderful starters and terrible finishers, right? Like you keep a lot of finishers around you because you have a lot of good ideas, right? And I even hate to see it called a developmental disorder, which I know that it is, right? But I feel like that doesn't tell the story to your kids, right? I think that's
right.
It seems a little limiting, right? I feel like to me, I think it's really I think it's a great thing. My oldest has more of these issues than my younger one. I'm like, oh, I wish my younger one had a little more creativity.
Right. It is impairing.
Yeah.
By definition, if you're not impaired, then we're not talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
So I think that's important to remember. Again, having worked with hundreds of these kids and these families, there is something universally just charming and endearing and lovable and snuggable about these kids. They're awesome. And I have to believe it's just part of the package, like it's part of the wiring. I'm not sure that they all would have, like evolutionarily, I think we would be extinct a long time ago if there weren't a part of us that's like a little bit, endearing. A little bit cute. Right? So I think it's part of the package. It's hard to prove and it's hard, it's subjective. So I think that there are real strengths that can come with this. But I also don't want us to forget that it's an impairment, it's a problem. And we need to be conscientious about and thoughtful about how we deal with it.
That's the biggest issue that I'm having with my oldest son. Because when you say like brain-based developmental disorder, especially when you're talking about a child that is very smart, very intelligent, if I say to my son, you have a brain-based developmental disorder, he's first of all going to go online, he's going to be looking up everything, he's going to start reading everything. Because what's the hardest part for me is about maybe a month ago, because I haven't told my son he has ADHD, I've always been of the thought, like, okay, if there's an issue, let's put the tools and resources in place. We came here, which helped him a lot. He understands that he has some shortcomings and he needs to work on those. But we've tried to equip him where he doesn't use it as a handicap, more so as a strength, like, okay, without putting a label on it. So we haven't put a label on it for him. But it's at the point where last month he actually said to me, is there something wrong with me? And I go, what are you talking about? He's like, Mom, I really just need you to be honest with me. Do I have like ADHD? I said, what would make you think that? He said,
I know, I'm terrible. I'm top 100.
But I didn't know what else. I said, look, I have some great news to talk to you in regards to that. I said, you're going to be so excited. Now, that's a month ago. I said, you're going to be so excited. He says, does that mean I have ADHD now? I said, Adam, we're going to talk about it. But don't worry. I said, even if you did have ADHD, that's a wonderful thing. I said, I think I probably had it.
I'm sure that didn't help.
But I'm sure I probably, I was just trying to put a positive spin on it. but I don't know how to have that conversation. I think I talked to you about it a while ago. I just don't know how to have that conversation without it impacting his self-esteem.
To me, and this also goes for the question of should I tell the teacher, right? Should I tell my kids, should I tell the teacher? People see the behaviors they see, right? They see what they see. To me, if you can use some words that help put that somewhere, there's a shelf that I can put that on, and I can see that there are other people who have the same thing and the same, like it's just not a weirdness for me. It's just not my own horrible shortcoming, my fault. There's a pattern out there, and I fit that pattern. It's not gonna doom me to failure forever, and it's certainly not something I can use to excuse myself from good behavior. But if I can understand why is it that there's this disconnect sometimes that I see, that I feel, or that the teacher can, like they see the behavior. If you can say, he's not a bad kid, he's got ADHD and he's working on it and we're working on it, and he doesn't have great impulse control, but if you can make things a little more engaging and stimulating for him, you might find that he's a little bit less of a pain, right? That's a different thing than just saying, no, he's fine. Which is, I'm not saying that's what you're doing, right? But there's this instinct sometimes, like, no, he's fine, no problems here. They see what they see.
But it goes back to what you said in the beginning of the presentation, where, because when he was like in, sixth, seventh grade, we actually were like, okay, we're gonna let all the teachers know what's going on. But because he's so advanced, which, I mean, it makes it hard because he's not like, they don't see the impairment. They don't see that. Right. And even his mannerisms and his, yes ma'am, thank you. I mean, my son still says yes sir, no sir, thank you ma'am. He holds the door and stuff like that. Right. So they're not seeing it, so it's like, really? Are you trying to get an IEP or whatever for your child? Right. They don't get it, and that makes it harder. Right. I think the more specific you can be, when you meet with the teachers at the beginning of the year, or whatever it is, you can call it whatever you, right? But if you're gonna have a useful, meaningful conversation with the teacher, it's not gonna be my child has ADHD, so you need to know that. It's gonna be, these are the issues. This is how ADHD impacts my child, and this is what helps. And I'm here to make your job, teacher, easier, because teaching my kid is not always easy, but I've learned some things over the years. Here's what you need to know to make your job easier, because this is how his ADHD impacts him.
One question, it's just for anyone now. Medicine, I'm surprised that medicine doesn't address it all. There's still like, you know, and I don't know if there's anyone, maybe we don't have red med, but
we're getting there.
Yeah, I know.
It's a process.
Yeah, I'm surprised. Yeah, I mean, it's true for some kids. I mean, for all kids or majority of them, there's still going to be areas where they have extreme focus, and others where they just don't want. You know, I don't know how much of it they have to. They need stimulation in medicine.
It varies.
Yeah.
Because the new program has actually prevented even kids that were on medication that came through your program. I don't work for I was initially a skeptic, but
I'll pay you later.
But your program, I mean, okay, so I was thinking
research that correlates ADHD. Did you find out that that's what is with babies that are difficult?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And it's in my intake questionnaire. It's all about colic and no sleep and picky eating and all of these. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Ever. Yeah. But when he was the happiest kid you've ever seen in your life, right? No. The emotions are extreme. Self-regulation, self-control, self-perspective, self-monitoring, right?
What about even in terms of getting back to nutrition and diet? Because like with my son, he's doing ultra-flora spectrum through Metagenics, which is a probiotic, and he also does the EPA-DHA, which is the
you know what, I'm going to stop you because I'm not a nutritionist, so I don't know the details.
But from a medical perspective, remember,
then good healthy food, you know, good healthy stuff in, good healthy stuff out. You know. Okay, I'm sorry.
I just want, do you ever have kids that like outgrow this, or is it just more of a matter of coping long term? Like that's, you know what I mean?
I think
Is that really what it is?
I'm not a big believer in outgrowing it. I really believe that people engineer their lives so that they can function quite well, partly because of it and partly in spite of it, right? Depending on how they use their characteristics and their traits.
There should be 5 characteristics for older kids and only 6. Yes.
Right,
Because
right.
you're able to actually engineer your life.
Right.
The medication has to be for his life or?
Well, it depends, again, on when they get to be grown-ups. Do they need it? What's the gap? What's the difference between their potential behavior, their potential performance, and their actual performance? And is that gap something that can be decreased with medicine? That's a value judgment that adults get to make.
What does this medication do? See, what I've heard, what we, like, my son is very hyperactive. He's very hyper, doesn't pay attention, of course, he's just 8 years old. And somebody suggested that, okay, we should see if he needs any medication. Our doctor, Michael has still not come to India. I'm very new to US. We've just come from India, and they're still in India. They'll be joining me in April. The doctor in India told us, no, he doesn't need medication until you want him to have. And the medication basically, in some way, sedates the child to some extent. That I came to know.
I suppose it can happen if it's used incorrectly. I mean, that's a potential side effect for medicine that is not used well. When it's used well, there is no sedation. There is inhibition, there's self-control, there's no sedation. There's more, what we're doing is increasing the options. We're increasing the options. If the child still wants to be hyper, he can still be hyper, but if he wants to control himself, he can control himself. That's what the medicine does, it increases the options when it's used well. And there's a whole other talk on medicine, which I can come back and do another time.
There was a medicine question.
Okay.
I have a question.
And actually, if you advance, there's a slide that gives my,
I was gonna ask, do you see patients?
I have a wait list, but yeah.
Well, do we get preferences? No.
It does help a little bit.
I had a question about anxiety. You had said you have another presentation that you do on that, or because we find, like novelty was one of the different ways to stimulate. However, we get impaired because of the anxiety when you have a new situation.
Yeah, that's what we get to.
Yeah, yeah. It's gonna be different for everybody. I think that to some degree, I'll make a bold statement and we'll asterisk it and say, we'll qualify it later. For the most part, if you're growing up with ADHD, if you're growing up with your behavior without being able to trust that you can behave in accordance with your own moral code, you're gonna have some anxiety. Like, that's scary.
Yeah. I know I should.
And I can't get myself to do it.
Yeah.
Right? The 7th grade girl who really wants to be a good best friend knows a secret about her best friend and wants to keep it and knows she's supposed to keep it, and then the cool kids invite her to lunch one day and start digging her for the info, and she spills because she can't inhibit. It's not that she's a horrible person, but now she's anxious because she can't trust herself. There is a component of anxiety that I think is inevitable. There are also people who are anxious and have ADHD because they're wired for both, right? So to what degree you're going to use fear, urgency, novelty is going to depend on to what degree do they trigger your anxiety and to what degree do they stimulate your brain. There's a great graph. We look at sort of, there's a whiteboard right there. Hey. Okay, so anxiety is down here, and performance is up here, okay? Performance goes up, anxiety goes up. No anxiety, no performance. You're not gonna get out of bed if you're not anxious about the repercussions of not getting out of bed, right? You do nothing. A little more anxiety, a little more performance. Okay, this is the sweet spot. But at some point, more anxiety becomes paralyzing and performance goes down. Okay? And there's sort of a similar thing for stimulation. For ADHD, right? No stimulation, no investment, no engagement, no performance. Okay? There's a sweet spot where I'm passionate and I'm excited and I'm stimulated. And then there's like, whoa, too much stimulation. Performance goes down. And so finding the place where these sort of overlap just right in any one individual is sort of the answer. It's the work. That's why this isn't easy.
I'm trying to keep them in the sweet spot.
Right. Right.
So a kid can be anxious, but it doesn't mean have ADD, or if they are anxious, doesn't mean they have.
Right, you can be one or the other or both. However, I will say that if you have ADHD, chances are you probably have a little bit of anxiety because it's scary to grow up without a lot of self-control. Okay, but in terms of like diagnoses, you can have ADHD, you can have anxiety, or you can have both.
Do you have any strategies that are different for an inattentive type that is mostly just overwhelmed with everything and so kind of disappears in their own brain? Is it totally different than what we just went through? Okay.
No, it's this. Again, it's like
On
finding a
that
place
side,
where
yes,
things
yeah.
can be automatic and